Musketeers have joined us. There's Carrie and Kristen McKee, Lorraine. And did I see Irina? There she is, Irina in Sri Lanka. Thank you. Sharon in Boston, Kim Mayer, Heather. There's Heather, beautiful Heather. Nice to see you, Heather. And Lena. Hi, Lena. Beautiful to have you. Okay. Wonderful people. Okay, guys. So we did a lot over the weekend, and Emily said that probably I fatigued you and also didn't really register that we're in a crisis, and that maybe people's capacity is already stretched and tapped. So please do accept my apologies. What I'm going to do tonight is, instead of just launching into the normal material, I've revised it to do a little bit more review and also make it a little bit more relevant, as you might understand. At least in New York City now, which will probably become the new epicenter of the pandemic, I want to make the following talk as relevant as I can, and still in keeping with the vision of the Mahayana, but also paying attention to the latest neuroscience of trauma, and to get us in a way prepared for the inevitable here. So by way of just review, then let's just very quickly summarize the paradigm of the Mahayana. The Mahayana teachings occur 500 years after the Buddha, and are based largely on a series of texts that were revealed by Nagarjuna. These are the emptiness corpus, the wisdom, the perfection of wisdom corpus, in many different sizes or lengths, the shortest of which is the Heart Sutra, which many of us had spent time to chant. And in the pith of the Heart Sutra is that things lack inherent existence, which means that they are mostly an appearance, a projection, coming from a distortion. That's not that they don't exist at all, it's that they don't exist the way they appear. And they say that the Heart Sutra and the Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, is the ultimate medicine, because what it cures is the deepest root affliction of any human being, which is the misperception or the distortion of reality that is creating samsara. So our existential predicament of being samsaric beings is largely a product of being misguided or deluded at a very, very subtle perceptual level. And the perfection of wisdom is the most surgical, far-reaching, and sophisticated medicine, because it cuts the root at its deepest level. And once you cut the root of distortion, then there are a couple of things that appear to the mind as they actually are, rather than as the way we have distorted them. And those are called the Four Seals. Geshe Tenzin Zopa raised those in his talk with us, and then I tried to raise them again last week, or this Saturday. Our minds in their ordinary samsaric mode are experiencing the world as permanent, and that things can supply us with lasting satisfaction, and that things are discrete objects in of themselves. That's the normal way that we operate, and as a result of that distortion, we seek and grab and hold and buttress against and run from, and all kinds of afflictive emotions that create a tumultuous experience of karmic reaction are all coming from that distortion. And so when the medicine of emptiness is far-reaching and penetrative enough, that reflexive habit in the mind, that distorted habit or reflex, is overcome, and things appear just as they are. It's not that the world disappears, but things appear just as they are. So you may have a person in front of you, you may have a pandemic in front of you, But the way that the pandemic or the person actually appears is far more flexible, far more fluid, far more intervenable as a result of this rigidity or this reflex being overcome. So one of the large hallmarks or the characteristics of the Mahayana vision is not only that things are much more fluid and empty and open, but what does that mean about the world? It means that the world is, there's nowhere other for us to be than here. There's no escape. There's nowhere else to go. The first 500 years of Buddhism, nirvana was a place set apart, liberation from. The aspirant or the yogi was inclined to meditate and to become virtuous and to become clear-seeing so that one could escape the realms of samsara. But the Buddha didn't say exactly what that meant, where that would leave one. And so there is this kind of notion that nirvana is set apart from samsara, like a little hiding place. But with emptiness, with the idea that emptiness dissolves all appearances, even that hiding place dissolves, and so once you have no hiding place, all you have is just this, only this. And that's not so bad. You see, if samsara is a place and it's bad, then you want to go to the hiding place, which is good, and that creates duality. It creates separation, me and you, self and other, heaven and hell, samsara and nirvana, good and bad. But once you have the medicine that dissolves these appearances and these fixations and these rigid constructions, then even the bad can become good. Even samsara can be transformed. Even someone sick can survive. Someone suppressed can be freed. So what it does actually is it beckons forth the altruist to remain within the realms of samsara in order to stir or rouse or awaken living beings to their own potential to see reality free of distortion. So there is this messianic inclination for someone for whom they recognize the emptiness of things. There isn't an aloof detachment. What there is a warm heart of engagement. There isn't this notion of I'm going to jump off and I've got my parachute, see you later guys, I'm out of here. What there is a discovery and then the wish, the inclination that others also will discover. What is the discovery? The discovery is none other than nirvana, but not nirvana as a separate place. Nirvana here and now. In the world. In our relationships. In our jobs and home life, even. And because of that, the Mahayana movement it takes on a much broader application because you don't have to just sign up as a monastic, a monk or nun. You don't have to be a cave-dwelling yogi. The movement, the Mahayana movement, was designed to be inclusive of the laity. And so when we went to Sri Lanka, for example, because that's a Theravada country, there is great reverence of the laity to support the monkhood because there's a kind of sentiment that the monks and nuns are the ones that are going for liberation. And the whole point of the contribution of the laity is to support them in that endeavor. And what they do is they generate tremendous amounts of merit that will be beneficial for them in the next life, which is already a revolutionary idea that people would support. It's like how we would send a few people to the moon on the behalf of humanity. The monks and nuns are supported to go on their revolutionary journey of enlightenment, and they're supported by the laity. But in the Mahayana, the laity have just equal opportunity. Equal opportunity, women included, Finally. Have a family, no problem. Have a job, no problem. No matter your gender, no matter all these distinctions, no matter. Everybody can achieve liberation, and no one has to leave. And those that are achieving liberation, once you understand emptiness, you understand that the most important thing is to awaken with others and to improve the situation for others. So that's a little bit of the spirit that we find ourselves now in the pandemic, is that it's so acute. The emptiness and karma and compassion teachings are so relevant and so acute that even non-dharmic people are seeing that for the first time. I.e., the world is completely interconnected. We are all in this together. There's probably not going to be a war right now. There's probably not going to be the normal feuding over ridiculous things right now, because for the first time in a very, very long time, we're all facing a common enemy. And in that facing a common enemy, we are all united. Now, of course, there's still gradations. There's still lunatics out there. There's still outliers. I won't mention names, but you know who I'm referring to, that are still very much in denial and very dangerous in their denial, particularly in positions of power. But all the more reason that we not succumb to helplessness and look up like helpless children to ridiculously incompetent people to lead us, when we are far more competent and far more united, and we can make a huge difference. And so the essential characteristics of the Mahayana bear very relevant right now, because we are seeing ourselves both the clarity of interdependence and also the need for compassion. People who are coming to their senses start to see that there are less fortunate people, there are marginalized people, there are people that are vulnerable, city-states that need more help and more aid in the immediacy than others, countries that are less fortunate that will need aid and need support. And so what it does is it actually is a microcosm of this larger picture of the characterization of the Mahayana. Is once you understand interdependence, it pulls on your heartstrings to engage. Once you understand how rampant and universal suffering is, then you are called to action. And just like I mentioned in the 4 points of Shantideva's exchanging self and other, once the distinctions erode, once you equalize self and other, we are each equally worthy of love and deserving of love, and each equally fearful of pain and suffering. And that's our commonality, the universality, what binds us. Then we can turn our attentions to what is really the poison or the toxin or the problem, rather than feuding amongst ourselves, rich and poor, white and black, red and blue, states against states, countries against country, looking for the enemy. There's only one, once you have universalized self and other, then there's only one enemy, which is the sensitive and elusive reification habit of the mind that distorts. So that's the one surgery that has to happen for every living being, and it's the one surgery that the Buddha can't grab a scalpel and help you out with. It's the one surgery that we ourselves have to ameliorate. And if that reification habit lays intact or is allowed to continue, just like a weed in the field when you're trying to cultivate a beautiful garden, if you leave the weeds intact at their roots, they will overtake even the most luscious fruit. And so even if you get clear, even if you are penetrative enough in your own self-surgery, even if you are to ameliorate yourself of the distortion, of this reification of perception, you are still living amongst others who are falling prey every single moment to their distortion. So there is only one mission for the Mahayana, which is to clear the fields of living beings of this distortion. And they will die trying. Life after life, there is only one mission until the entire planet and all sentient life, all 6 realms, all living beings are free of distortion, however long it takes. That brings us to the rise of the Bodhisattva, the archetype. The archetype isn't the solitary yogi that seeks liberation in the cave. The archetype is the engaged Bodhisattva working from the basis of emptiness, but with the warm heart that leads into compassion. And so this is the third of the points. The first point is that we are equally deserving of love and happiness and equally fearful of pain and suffering. The distortion at the subtle level of mind is the culprit, the main culprit, hindrance, obstacle, obscuration. And the medicine that alleviates or cures is compassion. And the way to disseminate the medicine is to practice reversing the flow of give and take. Practice the reversing the flow of meanness for otherness, we-ness for me-ness. So that's our job. And these kinds of crises, in a way, have forced everyone to taste that. I think that people that are, let's say you live in a building in New York City and someone gets sick, then maybe the neighbor is dropping off the food. And, it's very possible in New York City that you could live in a building with a neighbor for 20 years and not know their name. Yes or no? It's very, very possible. But I think under the pressure cooker of such a situation, it may be that people for the first time are like knocking on doors or texting or asking the doorman if there's anybody that anything can do. Is anyone that's sick that needs a delivery that dropped off, even if you're going to keep a distance? There is that inclination that is budding. What can I do? We're in this together. What can we do? Hopefully people in the United States will come to their senses and beckon the plea of Governor Cuomo when he's saying if there's a stockpile of ventilators, then please send them at once, and I commit to the rest of the country, whomever comes next, on my dollar, I will send it to you when it's your turn. In other words, don't stockpile, number one, share it to whom need it most, and then whoever gets it most, then it becomes reciprocity, pay it forward. Until the entire planet has enough ventilators, until the pandemic subsides for everybody. I mean, it's just so potent an image and so relevant to us that the economic system, which has been for so long so disenfranchising for so many people, now comes to a brutal halt, which not even the most sensitive and acute and astute economist could have ever imagined. And the ramifications that you can't forge any prosperity alone is now nakedly apparent. It's undeniable that everybody's effort counts. Everybody's value, therefore, counts. Therefore, the greater interest of everybody is paramount if we want to shift from lockdown back into revving up the engines. My hope is that we develop a new system, but also with that system, when that system is implemented, it is running on the basis of altruism and interconnectivity, the chief characteristics of the Mahayana. So what I wanted to do, because the pandemic is coming to New York City, and by all accounts it will peak here in 2 weeks. The latest reports shows that 150 or 140,000 people will be infected. The hospitals will be overrun. I now see it as our imperative and our responsibility to prepare for that. So now everybody is in a bodhisattva in training, whether you like it or not. At some point, you may have signed up this course to just get some nice information, but that time is over. That time is over. To just have an armchair philosophy, to just have some niceties to contemplate in the comforts of your home, that hour is gone. And now everybody has to be engaged and everybody has to be prepared as much as possible, as much as you can come up to speed with the training as possible. On this call right now, there are a lot of competent first responders, trained people that are professionally trained therapists, people that have already, yoga teachers that have already been trauma informed. But for the benefit of all of us being on the same page, what I thought I would do in my heart felt is the most prudent thing to do is to review some trauma basics together. And I will try to contextualize them in light of the current pandemic and my view of each of you being a budding bodhisattva, someone who has recognized each of the 4 points of Shantideva, the recognition that we are all one, the recognition that the greatest enemy is our myopia, our distortion of mind, that the greatest medicine is compassion, and then the willingness to exchange the self-centered way of living for an altruistic way of living. I think by now everybody feels that that is more aligned with reality and more aligned with your natural inclination and your value system. Some of you may not feel prepared or up for the task. What I'm saying is, in weeks and months and years gone by, we would have studied this stuff a kind of way that would have kept it conceptual. And now we are forced to learn on the job training. This is on-the-job bodhisattva training now. Best that you can. And if that means the object of your care and attention and your trauma resilience is your own child or your neighbor or somebody within this group whom you're making a welfare call for, then I hope it serves you, and it serves us to be more informed. What I want to do is, as I present some of the trauma-informed material, I don't want you to think that it's separate from the bodhisattva activity, even though it's not within the classic treatise of Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, or it's not presented in Lama Tsongkhapa. It is prudent as rational, reasonable, scientifically minded people to go for the most effective information that's possible, that will keep our nervous systems buoyant. So, and in fact, the trauma resilience and the contemplative methodologies are wonderful working allies. They fuse really well together. In other words, the trauma resilience will serve our aspiration to be bodhisattvas. What I have found in 20-some years is that some of these bodhisattva trainings, especially in peacetime, let's call it now, they're just very conceptual. They're niceties. And we have no time for niceties. So let's make it as brutally raw and applicable and practical as we can be, as we can. So Allison at some point will distribute a very quick PowerPoint I put together. Now you have to apologize. We didn't have time to give it to Lainey, so it lacks the artistic creativity. It's everything right now. I have had to lower my standards completely because everything is very jaggy and chop shop and whatever. But I trust that you guys understand. So I'm just going to go through some notes here on trauma. I also think it's very important that some of us may first recognize some of the symptoms, early symptoms of trauma in ourselves. And I think that it's important that we know what we might be experiencing right now. Because does anyone thumbs up? Has anyone felt extremely heavy and lethargic recently? Like traveling through mud? Can I see some thumbs up? On the other hand, has everybody felt like bouncing off the walls and incredibly restless? I don't see a goddamn thing one way or another. You guys all, are you with me? Are you online and with me? You have to appreciate, from my point of view, I'm looking at 60 tiles and getting no feedback. So help me out here. I'm like in my kid's basement, surrounded by toys, with a lamp in my face. So I'm going to define trauma.
One thing you could do if you want people to respond is you can see if you can have if I'm familiar with WebEx. I'm not sure what Zoom can do, but you can do online polls right through here, and you can get the kinds of responses you want.
I'm going to go with thumbs, because if you throw another thing for me to
Jesus,
learn,
Mary and Joseph, there's my dhamma.
there we go. Yeah, if I have one more thing to learn today, I might
I'm telling you to,
I might have a
I'm
panic
telling you to
attack.
learn it today. Cole can teach it to you tomorrow or Friday or Saturday. You don't need it today, but it's just something to think about.
Thank you, Corinne.
Might bring down your anxiety.
Thank you very much. Let's define trauma.
That was clever. I like that thumbs up, Alice.
A subjective experience to an unexpected, unprepared for, perceived threat to life or bodily harm of oneself or another, in which one's normal coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, leaving one feeling disconnected and hopeless. This is the most comprehensive definition of trauma that I'm able to supply you. I'll read it one more time, and again, this will be handed out to you. A subjective experience. That's important, because it may differ across parties. In other words, people can be in the same household experiencing the same thing, and one or more may experience something that the other does not. A subjective experience to an unexpected, unprepared for, perceived threat. So there's a lot of importance to these adjectives. Unexpected, unprepared for, perceived threat to life or bodily harm of oneself or another, in which one's normal coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, leaving one feeling disconnected and hopeless. A lot of this comes out of Trauma-Informed Dharma, Module 2, but now it's being reapplied. First and foremost, if we consider ourselves the compassionate or bodhisattva warrior, first responder to samsara, then first you have to recognize samsara in yourself. And this is actually a point that Lama Tsongkhapa reiterates in the Lamrim Chenmo, that there is no compassion without first renunciation. What is renunciation? Renunciation is the wish or the determination to be free of samsara. So first you have to work with your own samsara. What is samsara? Samsara is the distortions or the reification habit of mind that creates karmic reactivity. Karma and avidya. Avidya, distortion, not seeing, delusion, and karma, reactivity. That essentially is the definition of samsara. The experience of endless cyclic existence has these characters of avidya, the not seeing things clearly, the distortion, what Geshe Tenzin Zopa calls the hallucination, and karma, the reactive activity, propulsion, compulsion, reactivity. Those two are the building blocks of samsara. So what renunciation is the overcoming of karma and klesha, or of avidya and klesha. What is compassion? On the basis of renunciation, the determination to be free of samsara for oneself. Compassion is the determination to awaken to benefit others. For what purpose? To alleviate or to help guide them out of their own samsara, out of their own nightmare making. So here we have the definition of trauma. And we can say, in a way that this is, maybe the modern day version of samsara. This is like the most at-home version of samsara, right? Because it's got to do with subjective experience, unprepared for, unexpected fear of perceived threat to life or body harm of oneself or another, in which one's normal coping mechanisms are completely overwhelmed, leaving one feeling disconnected and hopeless. That's the bottom of the barrel for a living being. So with that defined, then I want to just talk about some symptoms to look for, both in yourself as you work with your own samsara, you work with your own trauma, and how you may be able to show up for somebody who's also symptomatic, not symptomatic in the pandemic way, but symptomatic of trauma. So there are 4 categories for the symptomology, and then I'll go through each of the 4. And again, this has been offered to you in the chat. You can look in the chat, and there you'll find a PDF if you want to follow along side by side. We are in the latter stages of that presentation. We're now in the category called symptoms of trauma. The first category is negative beliefs and emotions. The second category is intrusions. The third category is heightened arousal. And the fourth category is avoidance response. Negative beliefs and emotions. So first of all, the catastrophic anticipation and the narratives that are forward and projecting out in the future where there's an absolute Armageddon, let's say. I don't know about you, but those come up in my mind. So what's happening there is that the amygdala has been hijacked and it's sweeping into the prefrontal cortex, and it's constructing narratives about the future that are absolutely hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. And then there is a kind of reinforcement contingency in which the narrative that you're construing, you feel not to be a narrative, but to be a reality. And then that feeds into your nervous system. So I would call this kind of like a feedback loop or a spin cycle, a traumatizing spin cycle. So your body is already perceiving a real threat, but then your amygdala is getting hijacked. Then your language center is being hijacked, and you're constructing a storyline in which there are no possibilities, very rigid, very black and white. And then that's feeding back on your nervous system in a negative spin. The emotions, the common emotions, and that spin cycle: anger, sadness, hopelessness. And then there's also the secondary one of shame. I mean, anybody that feels sad and then is less likely to share sadness is less likely to share because they also feel ashamed that they should be somewhere else that they're not. Do you follow? There may be people on this call, for example, that are too embarrassed to say that I'm afraid, for example. And I think that that's toxic. I think that we have to show up for each other. Even if you're a well-trained therapist yourself, you're also a human being. You also have an inner child, and you also have a nervous system. And at any given moment, you might be feeling afraid or sad. So don't let the shame bug also interrupt. Just be willing to say, I had a terrible day. I don't know, for me yesterday, it was actually sadly, very sadly on Bodhi's birthday, his 6th birthday in lockdown. In the morning, I had a spat of anger. Like I was just absolutely fed up, and I was like, I had my temper got the best of me, and in the way I'm symptomatic, the pressure is getting to me, right? And I think that we just have to create space and hold space for everybody, that at some point you're just going to be a human being also. And you might find yourself sub-performing or feeling overwhelmed or feeling sad or feeling angry or feeling hopeless. And then on top of that, like, I can't show that. There's the shame. And that's the dagger. That's the dagger. So we need to be able to just be human, be connected, express how we feel, let others register that, let that come back to us as that's okay, that's absolutely okay given the situation. You're only human, take a little break. But you might also now start to see that with your neighbors. You might be online a lot with other people, your friends, particularly those of you that are living alone in New York City. And as this situation becomes more critical, these things are going to start to come up. And we have to be ready for them. And we have to be able to acknowledge them in ourselves, and we have to be ready and willing to acknowledge them in another person. The second category is called intrusions. The intrusions are when there's like a lava breach of the levee, or a water breach of the levee, or a lava flow out of the crust. So that's where something that's not being dealt with, for example, or not being processed, is repressed, and then it is so there's an incredible force to it, an activation, and it finds its way out of our denial basket. And so that it can break the denial basket and show up as a nightmare while you're dreaming. And why is that? Well, when you're dreaming, you're more relaxed, so your guard is down, and so boom, the psyche goes, I can't handle this, and boom, you're having nightmares of being chased, you're having nightmares of being locked down, you're having nightmares of being tied up, you're having nightmares of a great flood coming and you can't outrun it. All of those would be absolutely appropriate for some of us in the situation, or most of us, or all of us, or the entire planet at this point. That would all make sense. Flashbacks. These are common for people who have already had an incident and haven't well adjusted to it, haven't well integrated it. There can be an association in the immediate moment, and you can have a flash that comes across your dashboard. This is intrusive because it has nothing to do with the immediate environment. There's just been one small little association that's been fired or triggered, and boom, across your dashboard, or something completely unrelated. And that can be an emotional flash. It can be a visual flash. It can overcome you out of nowhere, and really can be quite destabilizing. Intrusive thoughts are thoughts that have a repetitive hold on us, and that you can be having a conversation, and an intrusive thought comes in, like, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, my kid is going to die, my kid is going to die. And it just has, these things have a very potent hold on us, a very powerful hold. In other words, they can't be resisted. The final one is the I add this to the mix here under intrusions, but implicit memory. So memories that are not well formed on the basis of trauma, things that have happened to us in the past. We may have been filled with adrenaline, for example, as a result of a fearful, terrifying threat or danger. That adrenaline then inhibits the normal processing channel of memory. So the hippocampus gets inhibited. When the hippocampus is inhibited, then memories aren't able to consolidate themselves, explicit memories, retrievable memories. And what that does is it causes those shards or fragments of experience. So sense experiences get fragmented. Sights, sounds, taste, touch of the immediate environment under which we were experiencing something threatening get stored in the body in a fragmented way. Okay, and that means when an association in the present moment happens, can be a smell, will fire a prior association of something that has not been well consolidated or integrated, and you will feel terrified because of that smell. It can be a sound. The ones that I like to use in lectures is like the 9/11 blue sky in New York City with the jets overhead. So it may be 20 years later, you're in Central Park and the sky is absolutely blue and a jet goes overhead and you have a panic attack and people are looking at you what's going on? Well, that's because you have an implicit memory that's just been activated and you're terrified. And that's extremely intrusive. Now here is the next subsection, which I think is very, very relevant. This one's called heightened arousal. I want you to think about your energy is on a spectrum. Your daily routines are incumbent or impingent or dependent on your energy level. So normally, under normal conditions, you're in a regular sleep cycle. You wake up out of sleep and you go and you exercise and you slowly ramp up your arousal. So then your consciousness is online, your body is online, you're flesh full of blood, you're ready to go. You go through an ordinary day of productivity, and then towards the end of the evening, you start to ramp down, and then you go to sleep. And then during sleep, you rest and you recover. Now, what's going to happen for most of us is that whole structure has been removed. The ordinary has been replaced with the extraordinary. The predictable has been replaced with the unpredictable. And then the arousal, the energy level has been Um, the energy level has been, to meet the demand of the current situation requires us to be more activated. Does that make sense? We are now in a unbelievable, unprecedented 100-year crisis. So that is sending a message to the brain that we need to be mobilized, because there is a very real and present threat. Now, this is unlike other times in our life where the threat was mostly a projection. It was mostly a construction. Here's an actual real threat. So we're getting signals from the news, we're getting signals from social media, we're getting signals from other people, especially their speech and their facial expressions, and we're being bombarded by a cascade of messaging, subtle and obvious messaging. And what that's doing is it's alerting the nervous system that there's a danger, and when you're in a danger, then you rely on the fight or flight capacity. You need that level of energy to move away or to defend yourself. But there is, very interestingly, a paradoxical message being sent to us right now across the planet. On the one hand, we are being sent a message that there is a threat, very real and present threat, that is going to require our nervous system to adjust and adapt, to fight it off and to flee. But what is the messaging in this unique situation is stay still at home, bunker down. And in a way, there's a very real danger to that, because it's a contradictory information. It's a contradictory message. In other words, we're getting one message that's supposed to arouse us, and then we're getting another message to stay still, another message to arouse us, and another message to stay still. I liken that to driving a car and hitting the accelerator and then also at the same time hitting the brake. Well, what happens to your transmission in your car when you accelerate and brake at the same time? You have a fucking nervous breakdown. And I think that's what's coming. We're in these weird, confined spaces, particularly those unfortunate people that are in highly densely populated cities in very small spaces, where they're being bombarded by information that's hijacking their amygdala and telling them they're in an alarm situation, and then they're being asked to stay still in place. So I don't think there's enough public service information about how to keep one's psychology together in this, because there's obviously staying in space is the right thing to do. It makes rational sense, but it's not going to necessarily make rational sense to your nervous system that has survived evolution for so long a certain way. So it may be that the hyperarousal, the high-end level of arousal of the spectrum, can be exhibited in the following, can be characterized by the following symptoms. Anxiety. And you can think about anxiety. And you can think about this on the spectrum of energy, anxiety versus depression, right? Depression is the low end and anxiety is the high end. Agitation and restlessness. I've been talking to a lot of people, both my clients and friends and whatever, and noticing in myself, what is agitation and restlessness? If you're confined to a home, what this might look like is like bouncing off the walls. You might be like tearing down your cabinets and cleaning off every dish that you can find and getting into every nook and cranny that you've never looked at where there's dust and microbes and whatever, and cleaning them out, because you're like, you have nervous energy and it needs to go somewhere. Is anybody doing something like that? Like they've started just nitpicking at things and like, what can I do next? And if we don't do that, it's not, I mean, that even is a little more constructive, right? At least you get a clean kitchen out of it. But where most of us are going are onto the phones and onto the scrolling through media, because we got that frenetic, restless energy, and we're like hungry for information, and we're just like we're putting that energy into like constructive mode. But in a way, that media binging is not all that helpful, because there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of catastrophic thinking out there, and so I think there's almost like an addiction actually There feels to be this addictive quality to the restlessness and hyper arousal that we're experiencing, the deluge of information that we're being bombarded, the quality of the information that we're getting, and it just feels like a kind of a ramping up, an addictive, like binge eating. There is preoccupation. You might find yourself being preoccupied on completely irrational and irrelevant things. I mean, you might find yourself or somebody else preoccupied about the pandemic, but you might also find yourself like that preoccupation just shift like a cursor in your computer to another thing, and you get really preoccupied about it. Like for me in my house, I mean, I'm just going to be completely transparent with you, like cleanliness in my house with the kids' toys. Oh my God. I get really fixated on it, and like I have to keep heeding the advice Stu gave me a while back when this whole thing, he was very kind because Stu knows my insecurities and he knows some of my Achilles heel, and he was very sweet, and he's also a very seasoned grandpa. And he was saying, Miles, during this lockdown, you're going to have to just let those kids run amok. They are also little creatures that are adapting, and if things are a little out of order or a little untidy, whatever, this is time for you to grow, Miles. Nice one, Stu. Yeah. So I'm just giving you a little example, like how my arousal, and also my arousal takes the form of, on the one side, I'm responding to clients and students and this and that, but underneath it, it's also like there are little micro outlets where this hyper arousal, it's like, where can I be of service? Where can I be helpful? Like, but underneath it, the recipient is getting some benefit, hopefully. But underneath it, it's almost like the arousal is allowed to just give free rein. It's allowed to just move itself and propel itself in this kind of imbalanced way. Pretty soon there will be no shortage of need out there. And so I guess what I'm trying to suggest to each one of us is take into a consideration and do an inventory about each of our energy levels. And now let's see, I'm looking at Erica and maybe Pradeep, people that are on the front line. You have to excuse me because there are some people that are in situations where they will be called and there will not be the opportunity to take a break or to recalibrate. You might find yourself in a situation where there are 12 or 14-hour days and you cannot take a break. And that's an unfortunate situation. And within that situation, maybe there's a more subtle caveat that you can do. But for the general public, people that have to stay at home, just begin to watch out for your arousal system. And right now we're talking about the high arousal. It can come in the form of anxiety. It can come in for the agitation. It can come in the form of preoccupation. Sleep disturbance is another symptom. If you're not being able to fall asleep, or you have interrupted sleep, or you're waking up before you feel refreshed, this is some sign that the arousal is moving into hyperdrive. And then aggression and frustration. So this is why I'm also trying to normalize it for some of us. Like, I don't want to get angry at the kids, but I am also human and maybe I'm becoming symptomatic. It's entirely possible. Okay, and then the fourth category is the avoidance response. Okay, so in regular trauma, if you've been abused, for example, or you've had a car accident, the avoidance response is that you will construct your reality so that you don't have to face the trigger or threat anymore. So if you're phobic of flights, you don't take a flight anymore. You take a car wherever you go, even if it inconveniences you enormously. If there are things that stimulate you in a certain way, certain smells that stimulate you adversely, or sounds that adversely impact you, you start to avoid them. And in a way, it is a short-term, it offers short-term relief of your fears or anxieties, but it doesn't provide long-term solution. What it does is it makes your world ever smaller and smaller. There are less things that you can do until you're just stuck at home. But the way that I think maybe this starts to exhibit in us and in our friends and our relatives and whatever is that there may be emotional avoidance. In other words, that there's only so much that you can feel. And if you feel scared most of the day, eventually you will start to want to numb. If you feel angry most of the day, eventually you'll want to numb. If you feel whatever the predominant negative emotion might be, eventually you will be overcome or overwhelmed by it, and you'll eventually want to tone it down. So I don't know if you're a drinker, but maybe you started drinking more wine, and you kind of just gave yourself permission to do that. Or someone you know started doing that. Or somebody's now like full into the second season of Game of Thrones and is going to tear right through it and probably finish all 8 seasons in a week, which would require them actually to watch like 9 episodes a day. But I guarantee you there are probably people doing that, and let's not laugh, because in a way maybe what they're doing is they're trying to anesthetize and they're trying to self-regulate in the best way that they know how, but they really don't know how to actually work with the direct signal in their nervous system. So if this spectrum bounces back and forth between high arousal and low arousal, high arousal and low arousal, high arousal and low arousal, the long-term effects, the long-term degradation on our nervous system is that the mechanism that is being activated by the threat, which is the fight or flight, will drop. It'll drop phylogenetically into the worst case scenario, which is the freeze response. In other words, what we described in the retreat was Porges' schema, the polyvagal theory, is basically a tiered model of adaptation to threat. Or as mammals, our highest adaptation is to seek safety and comfort and deal with issues by remaining online, integrated, communicative, co-regulating, and creative. And if we don't have that capacity, if we can't stay in that vagal tone, we can't keep that level of integrity, we'll drop into fight-flight. Then fight-flight will start to deteriorate the nervous system because we will be on high arousal for much too long, burning that kind of negative fuel in the nervous system. What goes up must come down. So day after day after day, if we're on an adrenaline rush, and where are we right now in the pandemic in the United States? This is still early days. If they're saying 2 months and they're saying in 2 weeks we're going to hit the spike, we're talking 2 or 3 months. So you can start to think what it's going to ramp up. The threat is going to become more pronounced. The internal neuroceptive response to threat and danger is going to require greater amounts of adrenaline in more consistent days than not. And then we're going to get deterioration. We're going to lose that capacity for fight or flee, and we're going to drop into dissociation, paralysis, immobility. So that's then we're no good to anyone. That's when we get depression. I think you would agree with me that they're staying at home and very hopeless and immobile and hyper-aroused and then dropping and hyper-aroused and dropping. This is a recipe for a massive amount of depression. I mean, we could see a very, very large scale, and we already have a really big incident, a huge incident of depression in North America. But something like this could be absolutely catastrophic. So among those that want to be helpful, among those that want to be engaged, among those that want to continue to be aspiring in their bodhisattva resolve, it's imperative that we take the latest research on the trauma and continue to keep our nervous systems balanced and regulated, and then also learn how to engage with others in a way where we can extend that nervous system to make them feel safe. And then I'm sorry to say this, and maybe this is not prudent, maybe I'll get a backlash of feedback from some people that are more professionally inclined. We will each have to do our part. If that means teaching someone how to breathe, or if that means teaching someone simply about how to understand their symptoms, you're going to have to do that. Many of you are already competent to do that, but some of you may not feel up for that. But I just think that that's going to be the most human thing to do with somebody. You might be on a phone or you might be on a FaceTime and somebody might be like, I'm getting really, really angry. And you might have to explain arousal system to them. And you might have to normalize it for them. And you might have to also say, like, if you keep this up for the next week, you might also find yourself dropping into a deep depression and not getting out of bed, or feeling completely paralyzed, or feeling unenthusiastic about anything, or leaving your routine, not working out anymore, not going out anymore, not calling anyone anymore. Well, if you let that keep that up for a few days, as social creatures, we don't do so good. Next slide. Well, I think one of the things I want to do with this next slide was, it just occurred to me that some of the current situation may be activating unprocessed trauma already. In other words, if you're not in the epicenter and you're still feeling a lot of this, one thing to look for, or one thing to consider, is that some of the guidelines that we have been given that are on a rational level completely understandable and prudent, on an irrational inner child level, your unconscious, your deep psyche, can be interpreting them in ways that are reminiscent of childhood experiences. So I just created a few possibilities to get us to think about this phenomenon. Of course, it's so subjective and so personal, there's no way for me to create an exhaustive list. But let's say that social distancing makes absolute sense, but your inner child reads that as a punishment. Maybe you were sent to your room and told that you couldn't come out for days at a time when you were a kid, and you were in there alone. And now your government is telling you to go out, and you go inside and you cannot go outside. And you feel, even though one part of you sees that's rational, you're having a nasty reaction to that and you don't know why. It's possible that you can look into your childhood and look into your past and start to see and start to check and start to do an inventory. Is it possible that some of the affect or emotion that you're feeling is actually commensurate with something prior the pandemic? So that there's almost like two realities or two planes of reality or two dimensions of reality co-occurring. There's the immediate crisis, which is real and creates a reaction, but there may be also latent traumatic imprints that are being activated or revealed at the same time. And those ones are more discrete, harder to find because they may be implicit, they're not obvious. I came up with a couple just to give you examples of this. But if you go to the grocery store and there's no food, or there's not the most desirable food, or they start to talk about shortages, this can make you feel unprotected. Maybe you had a mom that didn't pack your lunch, or a dad that packed your lunch. I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know. I don't know you. I don't know where you came from. But maybe you were left undefended or unprotected. Maybe you were bullied at school and your lunch money was taken away. I don't know. I don't know what the association hook will be. But things like shortages, things like scarcity, things like supply chains ending, they can have an immediate direct impact on you, but they can also have a psychological imprint level childhood impact on you. What if there's social unrest? Or what if, in our country, our president is not doing such a good job? I mean, does it start to resemble childhood conflict between your parents? Discord between your parents? What if Governor Cuomo and President Trump aren't aligned around how the ventilators are distributed? What if that starts like some animosity between them, which it could, as the situation gets more desperate? What if these figures represent archetypes of parental figures for us, and we feel really unprotected in a chaotic environment where there's not a unified front? So just another one to think about. Now, some of us have gotten laid off, or some of us are losing our income dramatically and quick. Well, if we have been conditioned to start to believe that our productivity is tied to our sense of worth, then what happens when you're not working? What happens when you're not productive? What happens when you're not getting your gold star? What happens when your bank account starts to dwindle? What about what is it dwindling? Is your self-esteem dwindling with it? Just some things to think about. Obviously, these are more complicated. Obviously, these will require your own self-reflection. You really need to be a good student of your mind and your past. I think we did a lot of work together over year one. I mean, you got trauma-informed Dharma and you got Hero's Journey. They all were designed to take you into the shadow. They were all designed to take you into your childhood. They were all designed to take you into your past. They were designed to take you past your own childhood into ancestry. There may be associations that get revealed in the current pandemic. And let me say this, if it's all starting to sound very grim, you will be the lucky ones because it is in the revealing that you will be able to do the healing. In other words, if you make a connection between something that's happening now and something that's happened in the past, you reveal it, you bring light to it. And then if you can bring light to it, you can integrate it. So I was talking with somebody, who was earlier today, her and her husband are locked down and she was being a little passive with like her irritations with him. And that's fine. You could just tiptoe around your husband or wife. But if you look deeper, maybe you're tiptoeing for a different reason. Maybe you have deeper, long-standing conflict avoidance. Maybe you're actually afraid. And how long are you going to last in a 3-month lockdown biting your lip and tiptoeing around your husband in a 300 square foot apartment? It's not going to work. And you're going to stuff and you're going to stuff and you're going to stuff and then you're going to blow that bloody house down. But if you recognize, I'm feeling this kind of pressure, I'm feeling this kind of irritation, I see myself biting my lip. Why am I biting my lip? Oh, it must have something to do with some other part of my life. Oh, in childhood, I was afraid to tell my dad I was angry because I didn't know if he was going to leave me or hurt me. Now that's all on the surface. Now you're in lockdown doing psychoanalysis. This is what they say is transforming adversity to advantage. We are not going to be very mobile, but we can go deep, endlessly into the psyche right now. Deep and endless. If you're a good student of your mind over the next 3 months, you can uncover all kinds of things that in normal mobility and normal ordinary life, when we were busy bees being professors and instructors and therapists and this and that, we have the time and the space and the tools to go deep and recover lost architecture and like a archaeologist. Manoj, nice to see you. Manoj, you're in is it Perth? No, Melbourne. What time in Melbourne is it right now?
It is 11:30 or 11:15 in the AM.
Congratulations on your, you put together a really nice, robust Instagram teaching. It's called something about feelings, isn't it?
School of Deep Feelings.
School of Deep Feelings. So this is extremely relevant to that title. So good luck with that. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody who had something.
It's Terry.
Okay, Terry.
Okay, I didn't know where to raise the hand on this thing. So what would be the difference between something that you've kind of learned from watching your parents do versus your own trauma? Maybe. Does that make sense?
Not much, really. I mean, we learned from the best of them. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So they call that modeling. So the way that your parents responded to stress and danger, there's a good high probability that you learned how to respond the same way that they did, So unless you've been through some therapy or unless you've done some autocorrect, it's likely that you follow suit either with what they did or what the social system, the cues around the social systems do. A lot of this is very unconscious modeling.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Deb here.
Yeah, Deb.
In terms of the activation of past trauma, I'm interested in your perspective. I've had some difficult discussions with friends who haven't been observing the social distancing and minimizing the situation, and it's really pushing my buttons.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be kind, but I also am, they're perceiving me as being judgmental. Any thoughts about sort of that scenario?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's two things. Again, like I think we live in a multi-dimensional reality. So, A is there is a pandemic. This is the government recommendation. We are stronger together. Those that aren't complying need to be reminded. It's actually your job to remind them. So some of us are more conflict avoidant. We will draw back on like, oh, I'll just let them do their thing. I don't want this to be a problem, and so we will bypass it and just let them figure it out. And that's a childhood adaptation. Others of us might say something and then we'll feel really guilty because we're kind of being mean or bossy. That's an interesting thing to figure out too. It's like, why can't you just hold ground and say this is not a good idea? Let me remind you this is not a good idea, and then you feel guilty. Well, this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about in the workshop that we didn't get to, called codependency. And it can very often masquerade as compassion. And unfortunately, some people are wee-weeing, and I really want to talk about this. But let me come back to that because it's a big topic and an important one for the Bodhisattvas. But let me come back to this other thing that you said, which is it pushes my buttons. Anyone who says it pushes your buttons, you have a great opportunity there. Really good opportunity. In other words, let's say that there's two answers. There's what to do out there, but then there's also what to do about your buttons in here. Your buttons in here, you can go into them and learn a lot about you because probably what's going on is something that is unprocessed, I would imagine. So I don't know you, Deb, but let me venture a guess, and I hope you don't mind. Let me poke around a little bit. But so these are people that are being irresponsible. So how many of us grew up with parents that were absolutely irresponsible? They didn't show a united front. They didn't follow ordinances. They didn't follow best practices. They were loosey-goosey. They were inept in some way. They didn't protect us, or they failed in some way. They didn't take things so seriously. And what that does is that causes a child to then be responsible. So maybe you grew up, I'm not saying you, Deb, I'm saying one grew up too quickly to overcompensate for the lack of maturity of their parents, and there is some resentment there as a result of it. There's some resentment there that people forced you, because they didn't take responsibility for their own life, it forced you into compromising your youth and your innocence, and now you have to take care of them. Well, that's an entirely possible, reasonable explanation for why you might feel irritated that somebody in the immediate environment isn't following the policies or the orders, because what it does is it ends up putting the onus of responsibility back on all of us. We're all trying to be good citizens. We're all trying to do a good job. Why are you fucking around? Why are you so special that you're fucking around on the beach and tanning yourself like this is no big deal? There are 450 people dying a day in Italy and possibly more. So it wouldn't be surprising that you get angry, but it's good practice to, when there's a button that's pushed, to have a closer look. It's like going down a rabbit hole into your psyche and into your past, and there you might find something that you haven't actually thought about or looked at or processed sufficiently. So that's what I would say. Buttons are good. We like buttons. I mean, in therapy, the more avoidant that some of the therapists are, the less likely they can really be of service. In other words, if they don't like conflict, if they don't like to put their foot in their mouth, if they don't like to stir the shit or stir the pot, and they like everything to be congenial and nice and pleasant, and the therapy session has to end in the bow, and they're very correct and they're very proper, the likelihood that you'll create enough friction for there to be a moment of break up or break down is less likely. And if there's no break up or break down, there's no breakthrough. So it's the people that take a little bit of a gamble. There's the people that, aren't, Allison's one of these people. She's a little forward. Allison's brave and courageous and forward, and she might rub someone the wrong way. Well, that's a good thing. Why are they being rubbed the wrong way? There it is again. I got rubbed the wrong way. What's that about? You don't like boundaries? You don't like to be told no? What's that about? Being rubbed the wrong way and having your buttons pushed are synonymous. And most people in positions of leadership like Allison are like, and especially the ones in the spiritual world, they don't know how to say no. No is actually just as important as yes. Oh, I'll make an accommodation for you. I'll do this for you. I'll do that for you because I'm such a nice person. What if that's recapitulating childhood over and over again, passively accommodating out of fear in the disguise of being a spiritually nice person? This is where I get really irritated. I get really irritated with Dharma centers, and I get really irritated with the Bodhisattva vow, and really irritated with everybody doing really nice things, because I think it's a fucking charade most of the time. I do hold out the promise of very evolved people who have really, really matured. But even there, I find really mature people are able to say no just as when they need to say no, and yes when they need to say yes. But what I find in spiritual communities is that people get a free pass and they can't do the hard thing. They can't do the hard thing because they don't have the inner fortitude. They're afraid. They're doing nice things because they're afraid that they'll be rejected. They're afraid that they will disappoint someone. They're afraid that they'll hurt someone. And so what that does is it diminishes the fortitude and the strength of the community. It erodes the strength. It doesn't build strength. So I wanted to talk about this whole thing of codependency. Codependency is kind of like when are we back? Has everybody done a wee-wee? Okay, because I'm just going into codependency. I don't know where we are. I'll come back to the other thing in a second. I just want to talk about codependency because it's something that was suspended from last conversation. The word codependency typically, originated out of the addiction literature, where a partner or a family member would overly caretake an addict, would be complicit in their addiction. And when the addict stirred or stomped or moaned, the partner, friend, or husband, or wife, or child, or grandparent, or whatever, didn't have the ability to say no and set a boundary on that addiction or those bad behaviors for a number of reasons. For example, they don't want there to be conflict. They feel bad. When we say feel bad, they feel guilty. They're afraid. They're ashamed. When addiction gets out of hand, like I once had a mother who was supplying their child with the drugs. And she was terribly afraid, and she kept saying, and it's logical, it makes sense to a certain extent, she kept saying, if I don't give it to him, he will go to the streets, and the street drugs are even more toxic, and maybe he'll die. So she's in a double bind. It means that, if she lets him go to the street, he might die, and if she continues to give him drugs, she's enabling him. So there's no way out. But if you just look at it psychologically, what's happened is somebody is doing something out of the shadow of their own fear and insecurities. In other words, they are too afraid to say no. They are too afraid to set a limit. They are too afraid to do what is actually right in the situation. And we know from addiction, like, there is a high likelihood if someone's really addicted, they may die. They may die. And when they construct these interventions, people have to get on board and really say, okay, Either I'm going to participate in this person's survival and their life, or we have to let them go and let them make their choices. And if they want to die, they're going to die. But we can't kick the curb down the curb anymore. We can't kick the can down the curb anymore, being hostage to the addiction. And so this is where I'm bringing this in, is that I think when you get into the Mahayana and when you get into the Bodhisattva and you get into love and compassion, these are all tremendously high, exalted virtues, but we bring our humanness to them. And so it's incredibly revealing what motivates us to do good. What is motivating us to be kind? What is really motivating us to be generous? What is really motivating us to... I have to stop something on my computer because it's annoying me, and it's Emily's computer, and here we go, a technical problem right now. I've got to perform under pressure. Here we go. I've got to find how to stop the goddamn text messaging that's happening online right now and interrupting my flow. For Christ's sake. Okay, I can't do it, so I just have to block it out. My point is, be aware of what's in the shadow for the nice things that we think we're doing. Taking care of others can just be a trap. It can just be what it was in childhood, where you had to take care of your alcoholic parent, and if you didn't, then they wouldn't take care of you, and because you were only 4, you might die. I think there's a real opportunity for when trauma studies and the Bodhisattva path come into conversation with each other. I think there's a real opportunity for the Bodhisattva path to be made much more mature, much more psychologically sophisticated. I don't think the Bodhisattva path is about being nice. I don't. And you can look at some of the lamas. Some of the lamas, they're not afraid. They're not afraid to disappoint you. They're not afraid to tell. Have you ever seen Venerable Rabina? Holy shit. Well, that's someone who's not afraid of her anger, not afraid of her wrath, not afraid to disappoint you, not afraid to tell you how it is, not afraid to I will not raise my hand with her. I won't ask a question because I will be castrated on the spot. And why should I bother with my little puny question? Let's just get on with the Dharma talk. You know what I mean? She's not trying to make friends. She doesn't need friends. Now, have I psychoanalyzed Venerable Bina in another way? We'll save that for another conversation. But you get my drift. Okay. So we're coming up on half an hour left. That was just a joke, okay, guys? I have tremendous respect for Venerable Bina. I like her fierceness. I think we could all use a tad more fearlessness and fierceness and stop being so sappy and sympathetic. What it will take is you have to be willing to accept loss. You have to be willing to disappoint people. You have to be willing to upset people. You have to be willing to get flack. You have to be willing to be discredited. You have to be willing to stand in your truth and let people disappoint people and let them get angry. I mean, do you see how it all is? All childhood comes all. I had a very angry mother. I could never please her. She could easily, on a dime, explode. It terrified me. It absolutely terrified me. It sent me into panic, and then it sent me into dissociation. I became very, very quickly very compliant. I am a compliant little good boy. Now, when that compliant little good boy shows up in therapy or shows up in Dharma, what does it look like? It looks like a compliant little Buddhist. Oh, bowing reverently with the gurus, cleaning up and sweeping the sangha, filling the water bowls. What can I do for you? And all you guys appreciate that. You think, oh, look at that good little Buddhist boy. But what has allowed to continue is the terrified child has allowed to continue in the guise of the good Buddhist boy. So when does he ever heal? Well, in the community, in the spiritual communities, he never gets to heal because that behavior is rewarded. It's like gold star, good little boy, gold star, good little boy. Don't be contrary. Don't make a mess. These are the rules in my childhood house. Don't upset mummy. Don't make a mess. Don't be contrary. Take your dishes to the sink and clean them. Clean up your bed. Go to bed in a timely manner. Don't stress anybody out. Well, shit. That's awfully suffocating, isn't it? So when is that ever going to have a chance to get healed? And look at all, and really from a karma perspective, now we're going to run out of time here, but from a karma perspective, because karma is subdivided into object, intention, action, and completion, the intention is not very pure. My giving out of fear is not the most pure motivation. My giving out of shame and inadequacy is not the most pure motivation. Now, when I give and someone receives it, then the action and completion create good karma. But if the motivation comes from one of these distorted childhood shadow-like things, it's not the most pure it can be. So there's room for improvement is what I'm saying. There's room for improvement. Bodhisattvas in training in the modern day context with trauma lenses and shadow lenses, we can really actually, there's lots of room to grow here. Okay, safety first. Clear the decks. Let's take a nice big breath. I want to talk about Dan Siegel, but I also want to talk about the whole issue right now. The whole reason I brought up the arousal and the low arousal and the spectrum of arousal and the types of trauma symptoms is because what is paramount and what is missing or what is out of reach is a sense of safety. The name of the game of trauma and the name of the game of what we're going to go through as a country and a planet right now is about finding and sharing safety. If you just want to take home one thing from tonight, find and share safety. Now, if there was no pandemic, it would mostly be a mental game, right? Because most of us live in environments where there's actually no inherent threat, no inherent danger. And even though you might feel depressed or anxious or lonely or whatever, most of it could be chalked up to psychological. If you're in a car crash, for example, the first thing that they ask you to do is take a victim away from the road. Put a blanket on them. You might even need, if they're in shock, you might actually need to hold them. They have to be removed from danger. They have to find safety. Now, with the pandemic, we have to be really, really creative. Really creative, because it's not a distortion. There's not a distorted thinking that there's a pandemic and that there's a real danger and that people are going to die. And people, I tell you, in 2 weeks, the staggering numbers that we saw in Italy are going to happen in the United States. And that's the whole reason I'm bringing this up now, because we only have limited time to prepare you. And I'm not about to do a Dharma talk about the high-level bodhisattva when we are in absolute dire, critical need of a trauma lens right now. So how do you find safety? Where is safety? Safety is in your body and not in your head. Your mind and people's minds is their enemy. So if they are physically out of danger, that will be the preponderance of us. We will be in our homes. Your colleagues, families, and friends who are freaking out, you yourself who are freaking out, will mostly be unsafe because the hijacked amygdala is taking you on a spin cycle of worst case scenario. In that situation, the sense of safety requires us to go into the body and cut the circuit with the mind, cut out the storyline. And then you will have to find breath, and you will have to learn how to regulate yourself back to center. So number one, physical sense of safety. That will probably be okay. Now, I mean, if you're in the hospital and you're on a ventilator and there's real imminent death, maybe some of our Bardo teachings will be actually more important to you then. I'm not going to go into that right now. Like, what do you do if you're on the ventilator? What do you do if you're in the hospital and there's no beds? You know, we might have to have a contingency plan for that. But for the most of us, safety is right under our noses. If you can get out of the brain or get out of the story or get out of the spin cycle and go into the body and learn how to have deep, sustained, long breaths. And sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes the snowball is too far down the mountain. So then you need co-regulation. You need to bring in a better nervous system. So we need to work as teams and buddy systems. We need to set up a contingency right now. I'm going to spend some time right now about how to pair up, get on a phone, get on FaceTime, and co-regulate with each other. I don't know how we're going to institutionalize this as a possibility, but it is within reach. Matthias is working on a strategy. How to use technology, FaceTime, how to share numbers. So if you're one of the people in a dire situation, you start to panic, you can't drop into your body, you drop into your body and that's not enough. You drop into your body, you start breathing and you can't, that's not enough to flip the switch. How to use another person's nervous system. Are you guys with me? Thumbs up. And if we can do that in-house with a CSP, I wanted to do this because I think some of you live alone. You live in Manhattan. It's going to get bad in the next few weeks. You may be partially symptomatic or fully symptomatic. You may not find yourself to the hospital. You may start to panic. I want you to have a buddy. I want you to feel like you can call one of us or put your name on a list where we can have a volunteer amongst you serve as a buddy for you. That's my intention. I'm just going as practical as I can for you. For example, like I have the benefit of Emily here, well-trained. She knows how to take care of me, but some of you don't have an ally. Some of you might need an ally. Some of you might really appreciate having an ally. And if you can show up for each other in-house, but then maybe you will be called to show up for somebody outside CSP. So once you go through the stages of finding a safe actual physical location, then you drop into your body, then you cut out the storyline. You may have to close your eyes or open your eyes depending, and then you use deep breathing. If that's not going to work, which sometimes it really doesn't work, you're going to need another nervous system. So this is where Dan Siegel gives you the PART, presence, attunement, resonance, and trust. Presence means that you're mindful, you're being mindful to another person. You're aware. You're not distracted. You're aware. You're not focused on other things, you're focused on this other person. Then you're attuned. So not only are you aware, but you're engaged. Face is the number one engagement. You get that phone on FaceTime and you see someone's face. What happens in that moment is that you have facial recognition and the mirror neurons kick in. The mirror neurons act as a highway system to go into the third phase, which is resonance. It's by way of resonance. We have been evolutionary designed to look at faces and through faces read facial expressions, and through reading facial expressions resonate empathically with the state of the other person. That's resonance. So I look at your face and you're in distress. You know, like today I had a harder day. Emily kept looking at me. You know, she's like, how are you doing? How are you doing? And what do? You guys already know what I do when people ask me, how are you doing? I shut that fucker down. I don't take help well because I don't trust. Why don't I trust? Because I got my ass kicked a lot by my parents trying to rely on them and then having that failure happen to me over and over and over again. So, you know, now it's come home to roost and I need her. And so part of my practice and part of my possibility and part of my opening will be to really take the help so that I can be available to other people. I can keep the course running. Arena offered her assistance. Deb offered her assistance. Some of you have been very kind to me. There's no shortage of kindness out there. It's all up to me whether I can receive the goddamn gift or not. You know? So I will do my best. Now I probably need it more than ever. Walter's got a beautiful nervous system. I love his. He's very secretive and artive. He doesn't say, "Can I help you?" He just shows up. It's beautiful, and totally disarms me. Totally disarms me. He's very skillful, Walter. He's a Buddha. So once you get presence, attunement. Once you attune, then you're looking at somebody, you're reading their cues. Once you're reading their cues, the mirror neurons are firing, you go into resonance. Once the resonance goes on, just like Phil in his sound bowls, you start to feel things in your body. You become a fine-tuning fork of another person's situation. Now, it all sounds nice, but there's a pitfall here at this step, resonance. If you open yourself to another person's situation, you can drown. You can drown. If the floodgates are open, you can drown. Especially if you're on the front lines like Erica, I don't know how you're doing today, and Pradeep, I don't know how you guys are doing. Wish I had more time with you after the lecture. Maybe I can check in with you guys. I love you. I want to check in with you. If you're not careful and you open those gates, and you're going one after another, after another, after another, it can overcome you. It can overwhelm you. And the other way that you can you can not only get overwhelmed intersubjectively, you can also get overwhelmed interpsychically. And what I mean by that is that you can be stirring up your own implicit memories and really become vicariously traumatized. How many of you guys are with me right now? I'm going to fall into the same danger I fell into with the workshop, which is going to be too much information. But what are we supposed to do? We have a lot of information to cover, and this is important. At least let me get it in the recording. If you are shut down right now, I hear you. I understand. It's overload. It's overkill. It's sensitive information. It's in your face. I get it. We will record this. You can just glide through, float through the rest of tonight, and don't worry. Come back to your bodies when this is all done. Take a nice deep breath, chill, have some tea, ground yourself. Tomorrow, start fresh. You can go back and pick up half an hour in or an hour in, wherever I lost you. I think this is going to be how it is. I think we're going to have to appreciate that we have less reserve. We have less reserve, which means you might not be able to get through a 2-hour class. You might only be able to get through the first 25 minutes. And then you're shut off. So the resonance is the Achilles heel. It's both the place where you're feeling into another, intersubjectivity, but it's also the most vulnerable point. What is key here is not to fall into symbiosis, but to preserve the distinction between self and other. So it's a very ironic thing that the 4-point exchange is for you to understand the first point, which is equalize the value, your intrinsic value and my intrinsic value, your fears and doubts, my fears and doubts, your hopes and dreams, my hopes and dreams were equal. Second point is that there is the same culprit in each of us. Samsara-making machine, distortion. Third point is love and compassion is the highway to Buddhahood. That's how you get out of the distortion. Fourth one, are you willing to exchange myopic way of living for an altruistic way of living? Most people think that means fall into oneness. That true compassion means that you're endlessly, boundlessly open and somehow you disappear. You disappear, that means you fall into the cosmic soup of paranoia. You disappear, you fall into your patient's anxiety. That's where I think people miss the point. You have to preserve your distinction with one foot feeling safe and one foot entering into the world of another. You have to feel that the lineage is behind you and you've got one foot in the ground, feeling grounded and supported in your body. You're not drowning, you're safe, you're okay. And then the other portion of you is receptive and aligned and attuned and resonating. If you lose that one foot, you go under. You run the risk of going under. So it may mean in the give and take in the battlefield, it may mean that you are literally, as you breathe in, you feel grounded, and as you breathe out, you're sharing your nervous system. And as you breathe in, you feel grounded, and as you breathe out, you're sharing your nervous system. One part of you is not in distress. One part of you is safe. One part of you is in real time. One part of you is connected to the lineage. One part of you is... there is a nice image of Shiva. The dancing Shiva has one foot firmly in the ground and the other foot is bent forward into activity. Same with the green Tara. One foot of green Tara is in the meditative posture of equipoise and the other foot is dancing forward into activity. Both these icons represent the same thing. Part of our mind is separate, part of our mind is with. If you go totally with the separate, you're cut off from life. If you go totally with the with, you can drown. So there's this dance. This is called middle way, folks. This is called blending emptiness with form. This is called blending self and other. This is a real middle way. And this is the most practical advice that I can give you that is kind of missing a lot with Dharma talks. Especially pop cultural level, they really like oneness. But you have to, in order to really appreciate non-dualism, you have to see the distinctions and the universality. Both of them are important. So distinctions mean I'm safe over here, you're stressed out over there, but we're in it together. There it is right there. That's what it really looks like. I'm over here and I'm okay. You're over there. You don't feel okay, but we're in it together. So if someone feels understood by you, someone feels like we have this colloquial term, I feel you, what that does is that's their rescue life preserver. When they feel that you are there with them, when they feel they're not alone, when they feel that someone's present, attuned, and resonant, that you're acknowledging them. So maybe on the FaceTime, they say, I'm really, really scared. And you will let yourself feel that, but you let yourself feel that within the purview of your sense of safety. You take a little bit of it in, but it's held within your sense of safety. And then you confirm and acknowledge with them, I hear that you're not feeling safe, and I'm with you. If you do that with sincerity, it will eventually register for them that they're not alone. And that will serve as a counterbalustrade for their nervous system. Because what's the name of the game? The whole name of the game, one word, guys? Safety. The number one thing that you're trying to do is extend your nervous system so someone feels safe. They're not going to feel safe if you start panicking with them too. But if you remain present and registering and calm and sending a nice vibe and breathing with them, eventually they will come back online. This is called co-regulation. And what that does is it builds the fourth point of Dan Siegel's model, trust. Presence, attunement, resonance, trust. This is what I think the Bodhisattva looks like in real time on the ground with another person. And if you look closely, there's emptiness there and there's compassion. What's the emptiness? The emptiness is we can be in the same situation and you can be having one hallucination and I can be having another. Or I can be free of the hallucination. You can be, in your subjectivity, you can be having a nightmare and I can be right there with you on the phone having a completely different experience. That is emptiness. If you have refuge, if you have the lineage at your back, you have a nice buoyant nervous system, you're on the phone with somebody, you're present, you're attuned, you're resonating, they feel that you're resonating, they feel it's authentic, they feel your nervous system, they share with you, you acknowledge and send it back, giving and taking. Eventually you create a circuitry and that circuitry counterbalances their nervous system, they come back online. I don't know if it takes 3 minutes. I don't know if it takes 5 minutes. Worst thing that you can do is start like trying to therapize them with some mumbo jumbo words. Don't talk to them. Just register for them. And it's an energetic game. And don't do it for more than 5 or 6 minutes. Hear what they're saying, acknowledge what they're saying, and breathe with them. And give them the message, I'm here with you. I'm here with you. This is one of the big problems therapists often overdo it with this analytical thing. It may be all tight, it may be accurate, but it's thinking. And the energy is really the most important thing. So I was going to conclude with some of the, I've already covered some of this, but the ways that we can boost our trauma resilience. Okay, I give you 3 categories: physical, emotional, and spiritual. And in the physical, I give some 5, 6, 7 recommendations for how to keep your physical well-being together. Okay, go through the list if you want, but they include things that we've already talked about. Keep your sleep hygiene really regular. Structure your daily routines. Eat healthy and nutritious, regular exercise, and keep your vagal toning activities up. Right now, start right now, whether that be chanting or singing or yoga or cold water exposure. Keep the vagal tone primed. The other one is shaking, dance and shaking. Apparently there is trapped energy in the nervous system that needs to be released. So some of this like vigorous shaking or dancing or movement, vigorous though. Shake it out. Don't worry. Don't worry how you look. Okay, the emotional support, we just talked about it. Okay, I just gave you like a run through of what it would be like to actually co-regulate, getting on the phone, connect, communicate, co-regulate, and then find a creative solution. When you're finding a creative solution, the number one thing is to work as a team. Don't do it for somebody. Don't do it for somebody else. Say, what can we do together? What can we do together? And don't start that until you feel that they're online, because it doesn't make any sense or any good to try to problem solve when someone's in the midst of the panic. So your number one initiative is to link up with them, share your nervous system with them, feel that they feel safe, and then when they come back online, they give you some signal that they're back online. They feel better, their breathing comes back, their facial expression signifies to you that they're doing much better. Then you can come up with a plan. What do we need to do? What do we need to do today? What do we need to do in the next few hours together? What will make you feel better? That's it. I think that's that. If we can just go through that, listen to the tape over again, look at the notes, maybe we will refresh next week. I don't want to do more than that because it's not our job to do more than that. I think that's just something in our pocket. That's a way that I think we can feel comfortable showing up amongst ourselves and with others. That I think is the expression of the Bodhisattva vow, but a trauma-informed Bodhisattva. Some of you might not feel like this is something that you can do. Okay, that's understandable. Just take care of yourself and maybe be willing to receive someone else's support. Maybe you're not comfortable actually offering the support to someone else. Maybe you have been compromised. I mean, certainly Joe, I mean, we would understand Joe's the one that should be the recipient of the care right now, given the fact that she has been through a terrible tragedy, loss of her dog, loss of her home, all amidst a staggering amount of tragedy. So maybe you're not the one that's going to be offering. Maybe you're just the one that learns how to receive other people's care, particularly strangers who are well-intended on this phone call. We care about you. We feel you. You've survived something unbelievable in the midst of all this. You're very brave to share it with us. We hold that with you. Thank you. Erica too, Pradeep probably too. Maybe some of you are also hurting in more subtle and silent ways. This is an incredible group. These are unbelievable, unprecedented times. And everything that we've been through right now, I think, is going to really have to come into play whether you're ready for it or not. And then finally, spiritually, if you never learned how to pray, now is a good time. If you've been making it through the course kind of relying on the science part of this, and you've never connected with the lineage visualization and the fact that there are other living beings and that there's a Sambhogakaya, now is the time. Because you have to remember, we have been indoctrinated into a very anorexic, spiritually malnourished, scientifically reductionistic paradigm. And we have done ourselves a great disservice as a result of that, because there are agencies, energies, domains of existence, dimensions of existence that are extremely potent and helpful right now. And some of you like the Dalai Lama, and some of you like Geshe Tenzin Zopa, and when they get on the conversation with us, they know that we're rationally minded people, so they very much downplay their own worldview and how they address these things. But I guarantee you, amongst closed circles, they are extremely connected right now. They're extremely connected to other dimensions and other energies and other agencies, and they're asking for help. They are asking for help. So it should be a clue to some of us that there's far more support than meets the eye out there. And now is the time to draw on it. And if that means pray, if that means, meditate and visualize, if that means open, if that means just be, suspend your suspicion just for moments. Suspend your suspicion for moments. See if something comes through. Maybe it comes through with music. When we get Phil and Tiffany to sing, and they start singing bhajans, and they start doing sound bowls on Monday. These are ancient practices and ancient vibrations. You might see entities, you might see agencies, you might see energies. When Lena is working on me energy-wise, she sees incredible things. And when she sees incredible things, I start to see incredible things. And I'm not afraid of them anymore. I'm not afraid of talking about them. I'm a perfectly rational-minded scientist, and there is another part of me that's growing. There's another part of me that's dusting off. And that I think I want to say, whether you were willing to accept it or investigate it, I want to say that now. We could use a little help right now. Okay, could I have a dedication, please? Lorraine. Well, first of all, I'm sorry, Lorraine. Let's really just imagine very, very, very clearly the course of our workshop together. And not just our workshop, but imagine all the years we've spent together. Some of us have spent 10 years together, some of us 5 years, some of us 2 years, some of us just 2 weeks. None of that is a coincidence. If we're just meeting now, you are welcome. And together we have found the Dharma, together we have practiced the Dharma, together we have integrated the Dharma, together we will apply the Dharma. And just think, going through these texts, going through these procedures, going through these practices, all on the basis of wanting to be of benefit to others, ourselves included, is incredibly meritorious, particularly at a time where people need refuge, they need reassurance, and they need safety. There may be nothing more important you will ever do in your life than what you do now and in the next few weeks and the next few months. I guarantee you that. So feel that this is not an inconsequential thing. This is an incredibly forceful, powerful commitment to humanity. And think that together we are coalescing a vast stream of merit together, positive energy. A counterweight to the pandemic fear is needed right now. A counterweight to the pandemic fear is needed right now and is something we are all capable of doing. So feel like, take a nice deep breath and feel that you are bringing all that energy into your central heart center. Another few breaths, bring it in. And now let's dedicate it. Let's channel it. So Lorraine, please.
Buddha nature pervades the whole universe.
Buddha nature pervades
Existing right
the
here
whole
and now.
universe. Existing right
We
here
dedicate
and
the merit of
now.
these teachings
We dedicate the merit of these teachings
to all sentient beings.
to all sentient beings.
Together we realize liberation.
Together we realize liberation.